Erev Tov, good evening. We are continuing with our Shiur in Aggadeta. Last week we did a unique piece of Rabbi Kook in the En Ayah, which is Rabbi Kook's commentary on the En Yaakov. Ayah stands for Avraham Yitzchak HaKohen. That's Rabbi Kook's name. And today we're going to be doing another piece from Rabbi Kook. A little bit longer, but something that hopefully we'll be able to do together. I attached a PDF, 3 of them actually, but if you look at the third PDF, it should say En Ayah text. I don't have that exact PDF in front of me. I'm using a hard copy book, but you should see, it should say Aleph, Bet, Gimel. We're up to section Gimel. If anybody can give me a page number for everybody else, I would very much appreciate that. It's the PDF, En Ayah.
I think it's page 3. There's a Gimel at the bottom, or page 2.
It's like a cursive Gimel. Yeah, that one. Perfect. Perfect. So the Gemara, if you remember, the Gemara asked the following question. Umimai dehai uva hashemesh biyat hashemesh, v'hai v'taher tahar yoma. How do you know that when it says sunset, Bi'at HaShemesh, it means sunset, and that the day passively, it passes? Dilma Bi'at Orohu, maybe it means sunrise. Umay v'taher, tahar gavra. And what does it mean v'taher? That the individual has to do an action in order to make himself pure. So remember, there's 2 ways to read this verse. Amen. There's 2 ways to read this verse. One was talking about sunset, one is talking about sunrise. The one that's talking about sunset refers to a Kohen who passively becomes pure. How does he passively become pure? Now the 3 stars have come out. Even though tomorrow he has to offer a sacrifice, we said, En kaparato ma'akavto. His kapara does not hold him back. What does it mean that his atonement does not hold him back? Which atonement? The sacrifice he's supposed to bring when? The next morning. Very good. On the 8th day in the morning. So how do you know that it's talking about sunset on the 7th day, which brings him to the 8th night? And now he's pure. Maybe it means tomorrow morning the sun rises and Taher, he actively has to go and offer a sacrifice in order to come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then he becomes pure. Meaning, how do you know? Why does the Gemara really get stuck here on this point? Essentially what's bothering Rabbi Kook is, why is the Gemara even offering an alternative reading? And let's be honest, the reading of that he has Bi'at HaShemesh, the coming of the sun, and the discussion of V'taher, and he should become pure, it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense that should be referring to not sunset and passive purification, but rather sunrise and the act, an action of bringing a sacrifice which purifies him. This is bothering Rabbi Kook. Why there are 2 different readings here in the Gemara, and why Chachamim are adamant over one over the other. Let's read Rabbi Kook together. You said it's at the bottom of page 2, top of page 3 of the PDF. Be'oni, in my humble opinion, נראה לי להתבונן בטעם רמז עניין הספק של שני הפירושים בתיבת וטהר, האמור אחר ובא השמש. In my humble opinion, I think there's what to pause and ponder on the 2 different readings of the Talmud. When after Uva HaShemesh, the sun rises or sets, the Gemara discusses whether this is a passive purification or an active purification. I'm asking you, but I don't lose me at any point. If you need to stop me and ask, because if you lose me, we won't be able to follow the train of thought together. So the Gemara has 2 different reasons, 2 different readings. Says Rabbi Kook, we have to stop and see what is the reason for those readings. Ikai al tarat yoma or tarat gavra. If it's talking about the day passing, or the day becoming purified and therefore it passed, or the individual, the gever, the person becomes pure actively. Umara'u chazal, and what did our rabbis see? Lefi ha'emet, truthfully. Lehotzi inyan v'taher ne'emar b'Torah, lefi pshata al tarat gavra, lesum oto al tarat yoma. Why did Chachamim, why were they so adamant to read, and this is Rav Kook saying, why were they so adamant to read the pasuk incorrectly? Meaning, not incorrectly, chas v'shalom, but not in the simple meaning of what we would think that this pasuk meant. Bimlitza haniret zara lefi hashkafa chitzona. In a way, in a manner, which seems unusual, at least on face value, and a superficial reading of this text. According to Pshat, the simple, I don't like the word simple for Pshat. Someone give me a better literal. I think literal is a better word for Pshat. According to the literal meaning of the verse, Uva hashemesh v'taher. Taher should be talking about the person who's impure, meaning the day passes and he becomes pure. So Rav Kook is asking, why did our rabbis insist on reading this pasuk differently than what it may have actually meant in the original? It seems like this is talking about an action that the man undertakes. And our Chachamim are insistent on reading it as a passive point in time in which the person becomes pure. Now, one could argue with Rav Kook and say that the way the Torah is written, its literal understanding is the way Chachamim understand the Torah. It would be incorrect for us to say that there is a more correct version of reading the Torah than the way in which our Chachamim read the Torah. And I don't believe for one moment that Rav Kook is actually suggesting that our Chachamim are manipulating this pasuk, or that our Chachamim are doing something different. Rabbanit, you're writing to me? Are doing something different, okay, than what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to be read inside of the Torah. But ultimately there are two ways to read this pasuk. And whether you can argue one is Peshat and one is not Peshat, Rav Kook is trying to understand what is really the difference between these two readings. Not on a simple level, is it talking about sunset or sunrise? Not on a simple level, is it talking about passive purification versus active purification. But L'maaseh, you and I, when we are reading this Gemara, which spiritual message, which educational message are we supposed to be walking away from this piece of Aggadeta with when reading this dispute? Rav Kook used to complain a lot about what he called Azavnu et nishmat haTorah. We've abandoned the soul of the Torah. You ever heard of that expression? Nishmat haTorah, the soul of the Torah. Meaning, the Torah has its own living, breathing soul. And so often, the Torah is turned into something dry and technical and cold and ultimately lifeless. Now, Kook argues that we've abandoned it. Now, he has a very painful letter, which discusses that we have to go out to the system and scream at the top of our lungs and demand, bring light back to the world of Torah. He said, but you shall know that we'll be met with mockery. The mockery of, what do you want? Shirat and mevakshim, songs, poetry you guys want. Kabbalat and mevakshim, you want mysticism. Rav Kook says, I want neshama of Torah. I want the Torah to be living. What Rav Kook is doing here is he's going to read a Gemara that is otherwise technical. He is going to breathe life into the sugya. It's almost like what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did with the first man. Vayipach ba'apo nishmat chayim. The HaKadosh Baruch Hu breathes into the nostrils of Adam a soul of life. To give soul, to give meaning to something. It doesn't detract from the literal meaning, but it gives us an educational message that we're supposed to walk away with. And I believe that if we would learn Torah more like this, being able to show that there are deep messages found, even in the more technical aspects of our Torah, that people wouldn't run for the hills like they do from a very dry, cold, technical, and ultimately lifeless Judaism. Omnam, says Rabbi Kook, Yuvanu hadvarim al pi hamuskal hakol. We can explain this in a way that is understood to everyone. V'gam Chachamim amru k'divrei harambam zal b'moreh nevuchim. And even our Chachamim agreed to the words of the Rambam and the Moreh Nevuchim. So if today we had 3 hours together, then I would sit down with you right now and read to you this chapter of Moreh Nevuchim in the third essay, the third section of Moreh Nevuchim, in Perek Mem Zayin 47. If you have a Moreh Nevuchim at home, and maybe even have one of the English translation, if you go and read Moreh Nevuchim, section 3, chapter 47 tonight, it's a good homework to do. To be able to understand what the Rambam there is, the Rambam is a beautiful piece there. In fact, the Rambam writes there something that is not relevant to my shul and all tonight. But he's talking about the concepts of Tumah and Tahrah, where we in the West like to translate as purity and impurity. And it's not at all what our Chachamim mean, what the Torah means when they discuss Tumah and Tahrah. When a man or a woman become timeim, they're not impure. Imagine walking around half a month feeling that I'm impure. What kind of feeling is that? It shouldn't surprise you then that there are subgroups of the Jewish people who developed all kinds of highly unusual practices. Name me an unusual practice that has to do with avoiding Jewish observance when a person is impure. That exists today, especially among Ashenazi Jews.
Well, there used to be Kabbalists who wouldn't sit on a mat for a woman who was menstruating.
Okay, very good. So there were these people who, but still are. They won't sit on a chair that a Niddah sat on, or they won't lay in a bed that because of some kind of impure forces that are there. An example I'm thinking about connects to the Bet Knesset. Anyone can think about the Bet Knesset?
Touching the Sefer Torah.
Touching the Sefer Torah, but even entering the Bet Knesset. There are some Ashkenazi communities that have customs that women don't enter the Bet Knesset. They don't say Amen. They shouldn't pray. The Rambam writes a highly unusual behavior. He in fact blames it. Yeah?
Then you have the complications of tzniut, so that it becomes all the time because otherwise...
Right, it's the rest, that's right. Okay. That's right. And then the Rambam says essentially the only time that Tumah and Tahrah really matter are inside of the Beit HaMikdash. Out of the Beit HaMikdash is life as usual. And it's unfortunate that I have a book in my home, a Sephardic book on family purity. And the whole introduction of that book exists to undermine everything the Rambam just taught us. For them, Tumah and Tahrah, about flowers dying, about people, all kinds of crazy, challah not rising, about a little bit of learning Torah, not like an idolater, would take us a long way. I'm taking this tangent because I believe that chapter of Moreh Nevuchim is very important, to just sit on and learn well. Over there, the Rambam, and therefore says Rabbi Kook, Chachamim inevitably agree with such a thing. But there's this attitude, it's an incorrect attitude, that the Torah of the Rambam is somehow Aristotelian. There's this, people love to, it'd be like if I quoted, I don't want to give an example, that'll be a bad example. If you quote someone, does not make you that person. It means that you found truth there. The Rambam quotes Aristotle like he quotes other things. It's not fair to put the Rambam in any other box aside from he was a true Chacham of the Jewish people. That's the only box you can put the Rambam inside of. And by the way, I would argue that even limiting his wisdom to the Jewish people would be doing him a disservice, because there were those around him who gained tremendously from him that had nothing to do with Am Yisrael, at least not overtly. He says that Chachamim agree with the Rambam's assessment, meaning the Rambam, his worldview, and the worldview of Chachamim are organic, they're together, they're connected, they're the same thing. There's a thing, even in the Jewish world of today, to try to paint the Rambam as some kind of, he's a Chacham when it comes to halakha, but everything else, he's some kind of heretic that was necessary for the times in which he lived, and so on and so forth. And it's a terrible thing. You hear this in so many different places, from so many different directions, that you almost don't know where to turn anymore to get accurate information. Our Chachamim say similar to what the Rambam writes in the Moreh Nevuchim. שהטומאות והטהרות שבתורה, that all the, and I'm not going to use the word purities and impurities, but all of the tumot and all of the taharot that exist in the Torah, hema remazim gedolim לענייני tumat hanefashot utaharatan, that they are tremendous, they're very deep messages that connect to the Tumah and Tahrah of souls, not just of bodies. Mitumot hadeot v'hamidot v'maasim hari'im. To free a person from all the Tumah that comes along with improper thoughts, improper actions, improper behaviors and character traits. Rabbi Peretz has a very cryptic introduction. Not so cryptic, but more cryptic than others. That's why for me it's cryptic. To his book on the halachot of the mikveh. In there, Rabbi Peretz has an entire introduction about Mei Hadat. I once studied it with some of you here in the Beit Knesset, about the waters of knowledge, and how, yes, there is a physical mikveh that we enter in water, but there also is a spiritual mikveh in which we purify our intellect. We purify our spiritual being inside of pure Judaism, inside of pure godliness. And that those who are religious, but who are unaware of how to purify their soul in intellect, are very dangerous people. They're lacking fundamental understanding of the way Judaism works and how Judaism is supposed to be studied. Says the Rambam, physical Tumah and Tahrah directly correlate to spiritual Tumah and Tahrah. And if you recall, those of you who are familiar with some of the Rambam's writings in medicine, the Rambam doesn't just limit this here to physical and spiritual. The Rambam believes very much that much of what plagues our physical bodies comes from an underlying spiritual, emotional disorder. That there are avirot that can directly harm us, bad character traits that can directly harm our health. And vice versa, ways in which, in order to heal someone's body, you also have to be able to heal their soul. I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful to live in a world in which, Baruch Hashem, the world of medicine, today has in it many people who are Talmidei Chachamim. Not just, always you had people who were Torah scholars who had another job. But there are those who are no longer afraid to bring their Torah wisdom into the realm of the sciences. And that's something that's crucial. It used to be people divorced those two things. I'll tell you where I see it the most. I can't speak for my wife. But my wife has been in the field of mental health for a very long time, since I met her. But today with her PhD and everything that goes along with that, you see a world of mental health sciences that has really shifted away from healing people. This is my stance. I don't represent my wife. This is my stance. Has shifted away from healing people's souls and instead has moved to medicating people's souls. That's really been a tremendous shift in the way people work. And I'm not taking away that there are people who require medications to live a normal, happy, healthy life. I'm not taking away from that. But that there is, if someone is suffering from something inside, it's a mental disorder, an emotional disorder. There's something there that has to be worked out on a mental, emotional level also. For so long, the fields of psychology, psychiatry, social work have been divorced from any kind of spiritual, religious teachings. And even if everything that we believe is false, chas v'shalom, even if everything we believe doesn't hold up water in a scientific court of law, let's pretend, for a moment. Just the fact that people are religious, that people believe, that they have faith, means that part of what they need in order to heal is some kind of guidance on a spiritual and religious plane. Even if you're telling me it's just for the placebo effect. It's required for any faith-based person to have their faith healed also, not just their body or their soul or their mind. And the scientific community is so far away, maybe there's some people making inroads, but it's so far away from truly grasping how important this is. But I'm going to tell you, and this is not political, but we live in a country in which the debate recently has been, are houses of worship an essential thing or not? And by the way, as a Jewish person, I'll tell you it's quite simple for me, is that life and preservation of life is more essential than anything we could ever do in a Beit Knesset. And that's obviously a fact, and that explains why we behave the way we behaved in our community for the last year. Nonetheless, the fact that for some people a grocery store is essential and a Beit Knesset is not, comes from not understanding that at least for those of us who our lives revolve around faith, that this Beit Knesset is as essential to us as the grocery store. What we get for our weekly shop, we also have our weekly spiritual fix. And you can call that all kinds of things that you want. Maybe it's the opiate of the masses, but that's a fundamental part in healing ourselves. Rabbi Kook says here that the Rambam and the Chachamim essentially teach us that everything that plagues a person in terms of physical Tumah and Tahrah have spiritual counterparts, messages, things that it correlates to on a spiritual, emotional plane. There's a famous story once of Rabbi Aryeh Levin, alav shalom. Rabbi Aryeh Levin, they call him the Tzaddik of Yerushalayim. The Tzaddik of Yerushalayim, he was a student of Rabbi Kook, and many people don't know that. So in the ultra-Orthodox world, many people read about Rabbi Aryeh Levin. Most people have no idea that he was a student of Rav Kook. There's a number of stories I would like to tell the ultra-Orthodox community, if they ever would listen, stories about Rav Kook, just so they could realize that he wasn't who they think he was. Or maybe he was not who they think he was. I don't know how to say that better. Rabbi Aryeh Levin was once sitting with Rav Kook. It wasn't Shabbat, it was a regular day. They were sitting in a field, maybe in a park, on the grass. You can imagine there was once a world where Chachamim, you could find them sitting in a park in the grass. It's behind all the poses and the they were sitting there, and Rabbi Aryeh Levin said he was just sitting talking to Rav Kook, and he was, plucking grass out of the ground. And Rav Kook held his hand and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "What do you mean, what am I doing?" "Well, I'm just talking to you." He said, "What are you doing with the grass?" He says, "I guess I'm pulling out grass." "Why are you pulling out grass? Do you need the grass?" He said, I don't need the grass. It's just what I'm doing with, your hands do all kinds of things. And Rav Kook told him, he said, every blade of grass here has some spiritual correlation in a different world, in a different realm, in a different place. And whatever you pluck here gets plucked somewhere else also. And unless there is a need for you to pluck what you're plucking here, why are you doing it? Now, I don't understand the realms of different planes and dimensions. It's not where I live most of my life. But I'll tell you on a simple level, that we need to be aware that our actions have consequences and ramifications further, beyond what we can actually fathom. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that we must observe the Shabbat, we must eat kasher foods, we must, whatever it is that we do, we must refrain from engaging in certain behaviors. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, this is one of those things we give up our life for. Yes, what is such a big deal about doing this? And you have to accept that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who created the universe, knows that the actions that you and I take, that we think are seemingly simple, that those are really big deals in another universe, in a different realm, in a different plane. That our actions have direct consequences that we are responsible for. Rav Kook continues. V'nei hakatuv omer ba'Avraham. The pasuk says about Avraham, and other, not just there, that Avraham ba bayamim, he's coming of age, coming of days. Ba bayamim literally means that he's old, he's getting old. His days have come. V'noda'a haderasha hamuskelet, and we know that our rabbis teach us on that verse, Shehayamim ba'u lo shelemim, that his days came to him whole. He had whole days, meaning he utilized his days. His days were not just days of time gone by, but they were days in which he was active, pursuing that which was important to pursue in his life. They weren't just whole days, but they were full days, if I could phrase it that way. כי מכלל דין וחשבון כבר ביאר הגר"א ז"ל, מי זה הגר"א? הגאון רבי אליהו, the Vilna Gaon explains, שהחשבון יבוא על הזמן שעבד בהיותו עסוק בפחיתות ועבירה. That when it comes time to calculating our lives on earth, our time is calculated based on how much time we wasted from our life involved in petty and improper actions. Because it's important that a person should involve himself בדברים המביאים לו לקרבת קונו יתברך שמו. What counts in this world are things, actions, that bring us closer to our Creator. And when we begin to calculate our time on earth is calculated based on how much of our time did we use productively and how much of our time did we waste. You live in a world today in which wasting time is normal. People kill time. Oh, I'm just trying to kill time. Why are you trying to kill time? Do you know how many people in the hospital wish they had some more time? They're not looking to kill time. Nobody wants to kill anything there. But we come home from work. You're single, you're married, you're a kid. 7 hours on Netflix. You fall asleep on the couch. You wake up in the morning. You drink a beer. You go back to work. There's a life. That people live a life like that. When it comes to your life, calculate how long did you live. I mean, how many hours of your life were you productive? Productive has all kinds of meanings. Of course, primarily closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes in many forms. Observance of mitzvot, learning Torah, tefillah, raising children, educating people, working hard to support your family and yourself. But the work that you do is also productive to the world. But compare that to how much time we don't use productively. והנה היום שעבר ולא השלים בו נפשו וירד ממדרגתו. Any day that has gone by in which we did not utilize that day to its fullest capacity, it's not a day that wasn't used. It's almost like we lost time in our life. It's a negative balance. כבר תמה היום שלא השלים בו חוקו. The day is pretty much past and we didn't use it properly. We lost the day. שחוק הימים נתנו לאדם להיות מטפס ועולה במעלות הקודש. Days were given to people so that we can use them to climb, to ascend the ladder of holiness, of goodness, of productivity. Meaning any day that we didn't use is not a day that's neutralized. It's a day lost. A day lost is a negative balance. Don't worry, Rav Kook is not going to leave us in a terrible musar place. To relax a little. But we have to know how to calculate, how to compute our time. Avraham Avinu is the type of person who everything that he did, every action he took, every word he uttered, Baba Yamin, his days counted. His days mattered. They were important. And there's a story, maybe Shimon Peres. Shimon Peres passed away recently. Alav Shalom. Shimon Peres once went to visit Chacham Ovadia Yosef. Now, you know, if you could think about politics, Shimon Peres and Chacham Ovadia Yosef have nothing mutual on the political spectrum aside from that they both lived in Israel at the same time. Let's pretty much put it that way. Shimon Peres was a big fan of Chacham Ovadia Yosef, very close to him. Shimon Peres was one of the last people, if I'm not mistaken, to see Chacham Ovadia Yosef. And he came into the room of Chacham Ovadia. And he kissed Chacham Ovadia on his forehead. And they made a huge tumult of him kissing him on his forehead. Who does he think he is? The chief rabbi? When they asked Shimon Peres why he kissed Chacham Ovadia, like what was the significance of that action? He said, I'm kissing the crown jewel of the Jewish people. It's a crown jewel of the Jewish people. Binyamin Netanyahu, should live and be well, the current Prime Minister of Israel. When he would come visit Chacham Ovadia Yosef, famously Chacham Ovadia didn't notice that anybody was in the room. When he would come in, he was so engrossed in his texts. And they once told, hey, Chacham Ovadia, the Prime Minister is here. And someone apologized, Prime Minister Netanyahu, we're so sorry you had to wait. And he said, I'm fine. Here is the Jewish people. Here is Chacham Ovadia Yosef writing the future of the Jewish people. That's what he said. This book he's writing, the future of the Jewish people. There are people who use their time productively. I had a rabbi when I was in yeshiva in Baltimore. Now, Tu B'Shvat was his askara. Rabbi Tendler, alav shalom. And I think every speech he ever gave us, every derasha he ever gave us, was about don't waste your life, don't waste your time, don't waste your life, don't waste your time. I think it was every Shabbat in a different flavor. So however you could connect that derasha to the weekly parasha, but it was about don't waste your time, don't waste your life. He was like that. That was exactly how he was. He was always in the Beit HaMidrash. We were in the Beit HaMidrash, he was still doing something important. When secular studies were canceled because of a snow day, it was snowed on the East Coast today, it snowed in Yerushalayim today, so secular studies were canceled. Everybody came back to the Beit HaMidrash to learn. You don't waste time just because something is canceled. There's a blackout in the yeshiva, so what do? You light candles and you learn anyways, because we don't stop learning because the lights went out. Your time is valuable, your time is precious. That message, he was induced in a coma towards the end of his life. And when he woke up from that coma, Rabbi Kook, who's the current rabbi in the yeshiva there, I just spoke to him recently. He asked him, Rabbi Tendler, how do you feel? Rabbi Tendler looked at the calendar and he said, I feel like I lost 3 days of my life. That's what I feel. And it's a person who really values time. There's some people who don't value their time. There are other people who do. And not just because time is money, but time is your life. And this is what's happening here. So what happens to a person who was tameh? Rav Kook is telling you that a tameh person, a person who's involved in things that are chet, that are improper, they're not just wasting time, they're losing life. They're losing time. And so now what happens to a person who wants to do teshuvah? I now want to do teshuvah for all the time in my life that I wasted. For the years of my life that I was not productive the way I should have been. For the hours in my day that I didn't spend. What do I do now? Says Rav Kook, when a person returns and does teshuvah, you know how beautiful the word teshuvah is? It's one of my favorite words in Hebrew. Really. A person doesn't do teshuvah, they don't make teshuvah, all kinds of weird English words. Shav b'teshuvah is the way you say it in Hebrew. Shav means he returns in teshuvah. Teshuvah, the whole root of the word teshuvah is return. I can only return somewhere if I've been there already. I can only return to who I really am. I'm not becoming who I'm not. I'm returning. But this is a concept. I always tell people the word giyul. I don't like the English word conversion. When you convert somebody, it means you take a person from what they are to what they're not. You turn them into somebody new. And there is an element of new. Sure, obviously, there's novelty here. But I believe that this is someone connecting to their real essence, to who they really are. And therefore the Hebrew word giyul is more fitting than the English word of conversion. When a person returns in teshuvah, yesh b'tshuvato shte madrigot. There are two levels of teshuvah. Hamadriga ha'echat, the first step of teshuvah, the first level, shemitaken ha'kilkul, that you fix that which is wrong, v'chozer lematzav shlemuto kemo shaya kodem cheto, and we restore ourselves to the place that we were before we did something wrong, before our chet. So we did something wrong. Now we do teshuvah. Our teshuvah that we did restores us back. We're now, you go buy electronic in the store, they say this is factory refurbished, back to original specifications. We've returned ourselves back to our original place. Even though we really didn't ascend any further than where we were before we did a chet. Meaning, we haven't improved. We've simply balanced out our negative balance, now we're at zero. We're where we were at the beginning. We're resetting the score. Mikol makom, nonetheless, kevan shekvar yatsa merisho, even though our balance is now zero, but we have left behind our evil, we've left behind that which we've done wrong. אי אפשר לומר על אותו היום שאין בו טהרה לפי ערך הימים. And therefore we can't say that that day has no purity in it at all. We can't say that that day has no goodness at all. We can't say it's a wasted day completely. שאף על פי שכשנבחן המצב האיש נמצאהו שלא פעל חוקו, and even if we sit down and we calculate with the person You had a 24-hour day, in an hour 23 you did Teshuvah. You still wasted 23 hours of your day. Does 1 hour of Teshuvah fix those 23 hours? If you did Teshuvah, you maybe regained those 23 hours, but you didn't use them properly. You didn't use them conducively. So you're at a 0 balance, but you don't have a plus 24 balance. But because we went through that journey of descent into a world of bad, and now and now we've made for ourselves, we've renewed our heart in the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Really, we've used that day, we've utilized it in some level to really get closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even if our balance is 0. And it turns out that the day has become pure on its own, meaning the day has now been accounted for. We fixed the day. We fixed the 23 negative hours. אבל האדם מצד עצמו עוד לא נדהר עד שיוסיף אומץ ביראת השם וקרבת אלוהים יחפוץ ביתר שאת מכפי שהיה קודם חטאו. The next step that is left for a person is now to add positive. So we've stepped away from that which is negative. The day has now been purified. But what about the individual? What action did we do? Not leaving chet, that's called teshuvah. We've returned back to our original factory specifications. But what have we done now to upgrade ourselves? And therefore, says Rav Kook, שאז יעלה במעלה גדולה מכפי שהיה, ונמצא שתשוב לו טהרתו גם מצד האדם. He said, and when a person takes actions, not just to stay at 0, but to add numbers, to add hours of productivity, of useful God-connecting activity in their day, then all of a sudden it's no longer a passive teshuvah. It's no longer that the day has become purified. The person is now taking concrete measures to purify themselves. And just like we were able to purify our day, we now were able to purify our individual person. So essentially there's 2 steps. There's the step of fixing the balance that's negative. Paying back our credit cards. Paying back our debt. Now we've balanced out our debt, we're at 0. That day has now become pure. But we're only at 0, meaning yes, and we're not taking away the tremendous amount of work it takes to press the reset button and bring ourselves back to a place of teshuvah. But teshuvah is just restoring us to a blank playing field, a new page, a fresh new page. Once we do that, we now have to take action, not just to fix what was wrong, but to do that which is good. David HaMelech says, Sur mera v'aseh tov. You must leave evil and do good. Leave evil and do good. I once heard from my wife that the Slonimer Rebbe, alav shalom, he wrote a book, Netivot Shalom. In Yerushalayim, we used to study that book a lot. He writes, why do you have to leave evil in order to do good? Meaning, why don't you tell people to do good? Why do you have to spend time in evil? By the way, in the world of Hasidim, there was a huge debate between different camps of Hasidim, whether the proper path for serving Hashem is to fix all the bad you've done in your life and then do good, or if you should just do good, and by doing good, you'll leave behind the bad. The difference being that if you involve yourself so much in fixing your past mistakes, you're still living in mistake. You're still living in chet. Your whole life becomes an obsessive journey of all the avirot that you've done in your life. Whereas sometimes it's best to just counteract your evil with positive deeds, with actions that matter. And ultimately you'll balance yourself out that way. There was a real philosophical divide among the early Hasidic masters. One that I don't get involved in these things. When it comes here,
I think that's what the researcher that had come to us
Rabbi,
only said was the main difference between Stalin and maybe
Rupshitz.
the Teps.
Vitebsk,
He Yeah.
Okay, so here we had a guest in my home. Where did I learn this from? I'm not expert Hasidut, but I had a guest in my home a few years ago. His name was Rabbi Abish Shor. Rabbi Abish Shor is a Karliner historian, and he writes many articles, many academic articles. Interesting enough, he has no background in academia, but he is very well respected in the world of Hasidic research. And he came to our home, and it was a very special person. He's a friend of my father-in-law. Didn't intend to be by us at all, but he ended up spending a few days with us, and we learned some tremendous things from him. The Slonimer Rebbe says the parable of a man, a farmer. He goes out with his boots on. It's a rainy day, brand new boots. His wife just bought him. He steps outside the front door, straight into the mud, and he's so upset that he didn't see that puddle of mud. And he decides he wants to step onto the dry ground, and he's just so upset. He's so upset that his boots are dirty. He says, "Listen, I want to make them clean." So while he's standing in this puddle of mud, he picks up his right boot and he starts to wipe it off with a towel in his pocket. And finally, the right boot is finally shiny, it's polished, it's clean. Now he has to clean his left boot. So what does he do? He puts down his right boot back in the mud, picks up his left boot, and starts cleaning it off. Now both boots are clean. He looks, he sees the right boot got dirty again. And he spends the whole morning cleaning off the right boot, the left boot, the right boot, the left boot, because he never... Says David HaMelech, the first step you have to do is to step away from your evil. You cannot be doing good. You can't be cleaning your boots if you're still standing in a pile of mud. Because you'll be spending your whole life, it's like building those pyramids in Mitzrayim that kept sinking back into the earth. Everything that you build ultimately falls apart. Says Rabbi Kook here, the first step of Teshuvah is to restore your balance to zero. To get rid of the negative. To make sure that the day is accounted for. But then there's a next step. The next step requires active work on your end. Active work on your end which purifies you just like the day was purified. With this thought process in mind, let's see how Rav Kook reads the Gemara. Rav Kook writes, "V'zeh ramza lanu haTorah binyan taharot hatmeim." And this is exactly what the Torah was hinting to us, was teaching us when it was talking about the purification of all those who are impure. Uva hashemesh v'taher. The sun came and then it was purified. V'yesh b'zeh shte madrigot. The two readings of the Talmud correlate to they correspond to the two different readings of our Chachamim, the two different levels. Mitzad haTvila v'ha'erev shu remez al taharato michet v'ozvo haderech hara kvar nitar hayom. That which our Chachamim say that once the sun sets, he's gone to the mikveh, he's in the Beit HaMikdash, now he's pure. That corresponds to the type of tahara of purifying the day, restoring the balance to zero, a passive teshuvah. Shekvar pa'al bo dvar tov, meaning you've already used this day for something good, and because of that, it counts as a good day. Aval adayin bichlal ha'adam lo nitar, but still, the totality of the person has not been purified. Sharei kodem cheto haya me'uleh mima shu ata, because before his chet, he was higher than he is now. Aval ksheba oro, but when the sun comes, his sun comes. Here comes the sun in the morning. What does the sun do? Light. Or Torah v'dat, the light of Torah, the light of knowledge. Umevi korbano, and he comes to the Beit HaMikdash and offers his sacrifice. Remember what I told you last week? The word korban, sacrifice, is from the root karov, karev, to come close to the Creator of the universe. The sacrifice is corresponding to a concrete action that we take to bring ourselves closer to the Creator of the universe. Litkarev lirtzon kono b'dat virat Hashem ve'avato, that we start taking positive actions, not just avoiding the negative, not just fixing the deficit, but bringing ourselves to a place of positive action, to loving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to having awe of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to taking concrete steps towards a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. She'az zedonotav mitapchot lizchuyot. That's exactly what our Chachamim mean when they tell us that our averot ultimately turn into mitzvot. Remember that teaching of our rabbis? That our wrongdoings, they suddenly turn into what does that mean? It's a transformation that happens on two fronts. On the passive front of the day, of wasting life, of restoring that, and then the active relationship, the active teshuvah between us and the Creator of the world. Az v'taher gavra gam ken mitzad atzmo. And then one truly accomplishes both levels of purity that exist in the Talmud. So our rabbis in the Talmud, says Rav Kook, they're not arguing. They're not arguing with each other really on a practical way on how to read the pasuk. We ultimately know how to read the pasuk. But behind every rabbinic argument, says Rav Kook, is some deeper message, or something else that our Chachamim are trying to teach us. They're trying to teach us that there are two levels of Teshuvah. Two levels of Teshuvah. One that happens because we've decided to abandon the past, and one that is positive, one that's the next step. It's where we take the past and we turn it into mitzvot. It's where we transform our entire being into a person who is good, who is holy, who is righteous. And these two steps are exactly why the Gemara is concerned. Are we talking about the purification of the day, of the past, of time, passively? Or are we talking about the purification of a person, the individual, actively? Says Rav Kook, we're talking about both. Both steps are required to bring about the refinement of a human being in his connection to Borei Olam, to the creator of the universe. I think that this type of reading of Rav Kook that we did tonight, I told you in the beginning, it breathes life. It doesn't take away from the halachic conversations here. It doesn't take away from the technical reading of the Gemara here. It adds another dimension. A dimension which tells you that even in our own lives, we're on a journey. Everybody's on a journey. And very often we're worried about making up for lost time. That's something you have to worry about. But you don't want to get stuck there. You want to make sure that once you balance out the past is the past. It is what it is. They say that the past, there's nothing you can do about the past. You can only fix it. How? By being proactive in your relationship with the Creator. Stop doing teshuvah that's passive. Stop doing teshuvah that's reactive. All the time we're reacting to avirot that we do. Start to put ourselves in a place that is positive, that is connecting to the Creator of the world. And ultimately that type of teshuvah, that relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, brings about an entirely different person inside of us, that is one that is always doing good. I will tell you, and this Rav Kook didn't write, at least not here, that I think that so much of the Judaism which we talk about in the religious world today, it's a Judaism of the first variety, of how to react always to the chata'im that we do. We're always bad, we're always doing bad, we have to make up for things. When people ask me questions, even the basic halacha questions, I used a pot for this, and a pan for that, and a spoon, it was dairy, it was meat. The overwhelming feeling of guilt that people have, this feeling of, I'm so bad, I messed up again, one more time, I forgot something. This feeling of guilt ultimately is what knocks a person down from actually serving the Creator. We get so distracted with the feelings of negativity that go on inside of us that it makes us avoid the path of enlightenment to Borei Olam, to the Creator of the universe. And I think that a Judaism that was less reactionary, but more proactive, that actually had spiritual doctrines, not just reactions to human ailments and failings that are natural to people. A path, a guide, like Rabbi Avraham ben Rambam, the guide to serving God, which we studied together. There are actions that you can take, things that you can do. The Rabbi Avraham ben Rambam, instead of focusing on what does it mean to desecrate Shabbat, he talks to us about different levels of divine encounters that a person can accomplish if they observe Shabbat properly. There's the person who just sits and eats and sings, and it's a spiritual day for them. Then there's the person who does it, and they're in a qualitatively different place. And then there's the person who encounters the Creator of the universe at their Shabbat table through food, through singing, through joy, through mitzvot, through observance of Shabbat. When are we going to stop telling people about all the things they break Shabbat with? They already know that. And when do we start turning Shabbat? It's not a spin on Shabbat, it's the purpose of Shabbat. It's the Ki hi makor haberacha. It's the origin of all blessings, the source of all blessing, meaning this Shabbat that we... Imagine the last time somebody told you that when you do a mitzvah, you're aiming, your goal, your purpose is to reach some kind of divine encounter. You put on tefillin, a divine encounter. You say Amidah. When's the last time you encountered the divine? When doing any mitzvah. Keeping Shabbat. Putting up a mezuzah. That's the real work. That's where we belong. Once we balance out the past, leave it in the past. Now it's time to go forward. A Judaism that is positive, a Judaism that is proactive. This type of Judaism will take Am Yisrael to levels of purity that ultimately will bring about the redemption. And I look forward to living to see that day together with you, with our friends, with our family, with everybody else, and especially with my dear uncle Chaim Yitzchak Daniel Bati Elana. He should have a refuah shlema b'toch sha'ar chol Yitzchak. I wish everybody a Laila Tov, a Shabbat Shalom when it comes, and God willing, I will stick around to answer any questions you might have.